be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 10th part of, What If Issei, Rias Enter Solo Leveling. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of YagamiNguyen on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Oto-sama. Rias called, concern and fear clear in her voice as she pushed open the office doors and entered. Asia and Akino, who had rushed to their house as soon as she heard the news about Issei, followed closely behind her, looking just as anxious and worried as their MSTR. Zeoticus, who was sitting at his desk and having a serious discussion with his secretary and Horace Winston, the senior evaluator of the Emporium, acknowledged their arrival with a nod. He seemed calm, but a flicker of uneasiness in his eyes as he looked at Horace and exchanged a few more words with the senior evaluator was enough for Rias to know that he was just as deeply troubled by the event. After a moment, Zeoticus finally turned his attention back to them, raising a hand to beckon Rias and her servants toward him as he stood up from his seat. Come. We need to leave, now. Saying that to them, the man then dismissed his secretary with a quick nod of her head, making her bow her head respectfully to him and Rias before taking her leave from the room. Wasting no more time, Zeoticus, with Horace following closely at his side, then led Rias and her servants over to the large magic circle that had been set up for them beforehand on the other side of the room. Once they had all stood within it, Zeoticus activated the magic, illuminating his office in the signature color of his household before all 5 of them were teleported away. In a flash, the Gremory devils arrived at the site where the C-rank gate, which Issei had come to work at, had suddenly transformed into a red gate. It was an unprecedented event, the first of its kind, since it was believed that only B-rank gates and above could turn into red gates, which would remain sealed until the boss was defeated, the entire raid party was dead, or a dungeon break occurred. Upon arrival, the devils of the Gremory devil household could immediately see the red gate, looming ominously in the center of the clearing. Its surface seemed to blaze with crimson energy, while a mixture of red and blue swirled violently within. The outer edges of the gate crackled with dark, jagged electricity that spread like roots, as though something within was trying to break free from an invisible restraint. The blue center radiated an otherworldly light, creating an unsettling contrast against the sinister red aura surrounding it. The gate pulsed, almost like a heartbeat, each throb emitting a faint, eerie hum that seemed to echo across the clearing. Rias felt her heart sink as she took in the scene. High-ranking devils and heroes had arrived and cordoned off the area, setting up a wide perimeter around the gate to keep themselves and the onlookers at a safe distance. Multicolored magical glyphs crisscrossed the ground, forming barriers in the case of a dungeon break. At the same time, patrols of guards, a joined force of devils and heroes alike, stood watch, their expressions tense as they kept a wary eye on the gate. Zeoticus, with Horace close by, moved forward, drawing a few nods of respect and acknowledgement from those nearby devils as they eyed the gate before them in bewilderment and shock, an expression mirrored by many in the area. A captain of the hero party guarding the perimeter recognized them and allowed Zeoticus and Horace to cross the barriers they had set up around the gate. As they approached, the gate emitted a sudden wave of red energy, seemingly keeping them from entering and forcing Zeoticus and Horace to step back while shielding their eyes against the intense aura. It's completely sealed off. But this level of mana, this red gate has to be at least high A rank. No, it might even be higher than that. Horace murmured, his voice laced with disbelief while Rias and numerous others in the area widened their eyes in shock. Even though mana had stopped flowing out as soon as the gate had turned red, making it impossible for normal mana meters to determine its level, those who were particularly sensitive to the energy like Horus could still determine its level, and his evaluations were rarely, if ever, wrong. How could this have been a C rank? That's something we're trying to figure out as well, Horus. A familiar voice interjected them, and the devils all turned their heads to see Surzek's Lucifer walking toward them with Graphia and Beowulf at his side, their presences providing a sense of reassurance, even as the situation remained dire. Surzek's. Zeoticus nodded his head to his son, who had arrived at the scene minutes before him to handle the situation. As the other devils lowered their heads to their current Lucifer, they soon noticed the blonde woman in a white suit who stood beside Beowulf and Graphia. Much like everyone else, she wore a somber expression on her face. Oto-san, everyone, this is Alicia Blanche. She's the supervisor of the raid. Alicia, this is my father, Zeoticus Gremory. He's also the current head of the Crimson Emporium. Surzek introduced her. Alicia gave a respectful nod to Zeoticus before shaking hands with him and Horus, leaving Surzek to continue as she turned her attention to Rias and the others. These are my little sister, Rias Gremory, and her family. One of the devils currently trapped inside the Red Gate, Issei Hayadu, is her servant. Alicia lowered her head to Rias, her gaze softening with empathy. Miss Rias, I'm very sorry. I understand how much your servant means to you. Rias managed a nod as she exchanged a worried look with Aquino and Asia, her jaw tight as she struggled to hold back her worry. Thank you, Alicia-san. Just, please, let me know if there's anything we can do. The heroes are doing everything in their power to figure out what went wrong with the gate. We have teams on standby, and... Alicia looked down, voice trailing off as she was unable to bring herself to continue. Everyone knew what a red gate was. They all knew what horrors awaited those trapped inside, and Alicia knew, deep down, that there was nothing she could say to improve or change the situation. Nothing that could ease the fear and worry etched on the faces of Rias Gremory and her two servants. All they could do now was wait. This is all my fault. Beowulf muttered, clenching his fists as he hung his head to Rias in shame. I should have been there with Issei. I told him to go ahead with the others. If I had just come with him. Beowulf, we have talked about this. Surzek said as he reached out with one hand and put it on Beowulf's shoulder, making him raise his head while Rias gave him a soft smile in understanding. This is not your fault. You couldn't have known what was going to happen. No one could. But what are we going to do now, Surzek? We can't just stand here. Well, if you have a better idea, Lord Gremory, I'm all ears. A deep, gruff voice cut through the air, causing the devils and Alicia to turn their heads to the side to see a man standing with his back leaning against the wall of a nearby building, lighting up his cigarette with a snap of his fingers, which seemed to generate a brief spark of purple-color electricity. He was quite tall, and his build was similar to that of Surzek's, despite having the look of a man in his middle ages, with a stubble beard that framed his sharp jawline, and light brown hair that was swept back. His clothing was a black business suit with leather gloves and two belts that slung over his waist, one black one cyan. Sid. Zeoticus acknowledged the man, who exhaled a cloud of smoke, the tendrils curling upward in the still air before he began to approach them with a appealing young woman following closely behind him, looking to be in her early 20s with long, dark purple hair that fell down her back in waves and matching eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. She was dressed in a sleek, dark purple two-piece business suit that matched her hair and hugged her amazing, voluptuous figure in all the right places. The blazer cinched at the waist, accentuating her hourglass shape, while the white blouse underneath was fully buttoned, giving her a polished and professional appearance. Her pencil skirt clung to her hips and thighs, highlighting the curves of her wide, womanly hips as it tapered down to just above her knees. The fabric was smooth and snug, emphasizing the graceful lines of her legs, which were further elongated by a pair of elegant black heels. If there was anything that looked out of place, it would be the veil she wore at the back of her head. A golden headpiece held it in place as the veil cascaded over her shoulders and fell to the small of her back, swaying gently behind her with each movement, giving her the image of a nun. Or a fortune teller, with the tarot card she was holding in her hands as she followed the man that had been addressed as Sid. "I came as soon as I could, Xioticus," the man said, shaking hands with Xioticus before doing the same with Cerzex, who gave a respectful nod. Sid then turned his attention to Rias, offering a courteous introduction to those who hadn't met him before. "Sidolphus Telamon, at your service." Sid is the current leader of the Japanese branch of the hero faction. Xioticus explained, making Rias and others nod their heads in understanding before exchanging puzzled glances. "My great-great-great-grandmother is Japanese." As if he could read their minds, Sid replied with a dry chuckle, shrugging off the confusion. He gestured toward the young woman standing beside him. "Anyway, this is Isla Wright, my new assistant." "Nice to meet you, everyone," Isla said with a polite smile. Sid looked at his assistant with a small smile, reaching out to rest his hand on her shoulder as she kept her head bowed, as if trying to avoid the gaze of those standing in front of them. It's her first day on the job. His expression grew serious as he turned his focus toward the red gate, inhaling deeply before removing his cigarette from his lips to hold it at his side. "How many are in there?" "Including the supporters, 30, sir," Alicia answered. "Sieghart is with them?" "Yes, sir." If this were a typical red gate, I wouldn't be too worried," Sid said thoughtfully. Strange as he is, Sieghart's just as capable as he is a reliable leader. That man knows how to keep people alive, and I mean it. He nodded confidently, causing Rias and the others to sweat drop at his casual tone. "Isn't the Red Dragon Emperor kid in there too?" "Yes." It was Rias who answered the question, making Sid nod his head in response. "That increases their odds if the kid can take care of himself. With luck, they might be able to hold on long enough for the dungeon break to occur so we can get to them." Sid mused, his gaze fixed on the ominous red gate. As much as we always try to avoid it, the dungeon break is the only way we have right now to tell for sure if everyone in there is still alive or not. For now, there's nothing we can do but wait. A heavy silence fell upon the group as they gazed at the enormous portal of swirling red and blue energy before them. There was no telling how much time had passed inside. Time was known to dilate in red gates, where one day inside could equal only an hour in the outside world. It had almost been an hour since it turned red, and a whole day could have passed within the gate. "Rias, don't you and the girls have school tomorrow?" "You should." Cerzex began, breaking the silence as he looked at his sister. "No, I'll stay here, Enai-sama." Rias shook her head, her resolve clear as Akino and Asia joined her, nodding in agreement. "I won't leave until I know Issei is safe. If they want to stay then let them. It's always fine to skip school for a day or two." Crushing the cigarette under his boots, snuffing the glowing ember with a swift motion, Sid then turned to the blonde mage and spoke to her. "Alicia, take the girls to your post and make sure they're comfortable. I have a feeling it's going to be a long night." "Yes, sir." Alicia nodded and turned to Rias and the others, her expression softening slightly. "Come on, let's get you three settled." She motioned for them to follow her, and without a word, they moved toward her post, where temporary accommodations had been set up. "Are you all right, Isla-san?" Grafia asked in concern, having noticed the troubled expression that Isla had on her face the moment she lifted his head. Her face was rather pale. Her brows furrowed in nervousness, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't mind her. Isla believes all the misfortune in this world is because of her." "Probably blaming yourself for that gate, aren't you?" Sid asked with an amused chuckle as he lit another cigarette. Aye. It's as you said, sir. This is my first day at work, and, that happens." Isla replied, trying to force a smile but failed almost immediately as her gaze drifted toward the ominous red gate looming before them. "An also." She then glanced down at the stack of tarot cards in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she brushed over the top card. The card I drew just before we got the news. Isla then pulled the card from the deck and held it up for Sid and the devils to see. The card was clearly self-drawn by a child, or someone who's just bad at drawing, featuring a chibi depiction of Isla herself in the frame. However, with the skulls floating around her, the scythe in her hand, and the black cloak she was wearing along with the letters for you die written at the top, it was quite clear what tarot card it was supposed to be. Death. Oi. Why didn't you tell us there was a snowstorm in here? One of the supporters shouted over the howling winds, their voice barely cutting through the chaos of the storm. Issei gritted his teeth as the snowstorm raged around him, using his arm to shield his face from the frigid wind that whipped against his body, making it nearly impossible to keep his eyes open. He glanced over his shoulder toward the other supporters from the Crimson Emporium, seeing them all struggling to move through the deepening snow. Their hands were tightly gripping the carts transporting their tools, their movements slow and labored as the snow reached all the way up to their knees. The massive trees of the forest around them fared no better. Tall, snow-dusted trunks loomed ominously against the white landscape, their branches creaking under the heavy weight of the snow. Snow piled up on the ground, making each step a struggle as their boots sank into it like a thick, suffocating blanket. Visibility was nearly zero, the swirling flurries reducing the already dim light to little more than a dull, gray blur. Someone had get back out there to grab some more warm clothes, or we're going to freeze like popsicles. Another shouted, his voice was just as barely audible over the roaring winds. The man nearest the gate responded by waving his hand over his head, ready to rush outside for additional supplies. However, just as he was about to cross over, the portal abruptly flared up in an ominous red hue. The harsh winds seemed to howl louder as the once stable-looking portal exploded in a wave of crimson and black electricity, casting an ominous, bloody hue across the stormy landscape. As they stood there, watching in disbelief with many having their eyes widened in horror and realization, the portal shrunk and disappeared with a violent, thunderous crack, leaving behind nothing but a hollow space where it once stood. Now way! One of the supporters near the gate shouted, his voice trembling with disbelief. It's gone. What in the world? Does that mean we? A sorceress from the main strike team stammered, her staff gripped tightly against her chest. Her face was pale, but it was clearly not just from the cold, but also terror. We're in a red gate. The warrior standing closest to Issei shouted, confirming his suspicion. Panic began to spread like wildfire as the full weight of what had just occurred set in as everyone exchanged frantic, confused looks and questions. A C-rank gate wasn't supposed to turn red, yet it had just done exactly that right before their eyes. Issei, what are we going to do now? Frank, the leader of the mining unit, who Issei had become good friends with, asked him. Issei opened his mouth to answer the question, but no word came out of him when his inner alarm blared loudly in his mind. Instinctively, he shot his hand out, catching a large spike of ice that would have pierced Frank through his chest, his eyes widening briefly before he snapped his head to the side to see numerous humanoid figures running at them from the distance. HL walkers. A warrior from the main strike team yelled, quickly raising his sword to deflect an ice spike hurled at him. The spike shattered into pieces upon impact, but the oncoming creatures Hellwalkers, all level 30, tall humanoid creatures with glowing, icy blue eyes and frozen skin, some with jagged spikes protruding from their shoulders, did not relent as they continued the charge. Some raised their hands high into the air before slamming them down onto the snow-covered ground, unleashing violent, powerful waves of icy winds at the raid. Worry not, my appealing friends. We shall not die here today. Shielders, with me. Sieghart commanded, his dramatic voice cutting through the chaos as he ran forward while removing his shield from his back. With just one hand, the man slammed his shield down into the snow, using it to shield himself and the raid from the first wave of icy winds before other shield-wielding members of the strike team joined him, linking their defenses together to form an impenetrable wall that protected the less defensive-oriented members of the raid from the storm of ice and wind. Mages, use your fire spells. Sieghart shouted another command, standing his ground and holding his shield firm even as the Hellwalkers came at him like violent, wild beasts. Now! The blonde barked, moving his shield just a little to the side to punch the Hellwalker in front of him in the face, knocking it back before it was struck by a fireball, striking its body with enough power and heat to blow it to pieces and melt it away on the spot. More and more fireballs started soaring over the wall of shields, erupting from the hands and staves of the three mages standing in the back, their flames slicing through the howling winds and striking the charging Hellwalkers. Each impact left a trail of scorched earth, momentarily forcing the relentless ice creatures back, but the onslaught of enemies only grew stronger with each passing moment. There was only so much that three mages could do in a snowstorm like this. More Hellwalkers continued to emerge from the woods, looking far stronger than the ones that had come first. Some wielded weapons in their hands like swords and hammers, others clad in armors that was so sturdy it let them withstand the full force of multiple fireballs with little damage. The sheer numbers were overwhelming. But Sieghart was unfazed. His eyes narrowed as he unsheathed his sword and declared with his usual flair. "Warriors, it's your turn." The warriors let out mighty battle cries as they charged into battle, with Sieghart himself also removing his sword from his sheath to join them. With a sharp swing, the blade uncoiled, slicing through the air like a WHP. It slashed through three Hellwalkers in a single, sweeping arc, their frozen bodies torn apart by the force before wrapping around the neck of another. Smirking, the man yanked the creature toward him, pulling it off its feet. Before it could react, he slammed his shield into its whole body, bashing it with such force that the surrounding snow was blasted away while the creature crumpled beneath the impact. The battle raged on as the heroes fought fiercely against the relentless horde of Hellwalkers. One warrior parried a blow from a sword-wielding monster before driving his own blade deep into its chest. Another swung a massive axe, cutting down two at once, his muscles straining as he cleaved through the monsters. For a moment, it seemed they had it. The clang of steel and bang of fireball explosions filled the air as they pushed the horde back, reducing their number slowly but steadily. But then, a massive Hellwalker emerged, towering over the others as it came charged at Sieghart while wielding a colossal hammer. The blonde reacted quickly, raising his shield to block the strike as the hammer came crashing down on him like falling mountain the moment the Hellwalker was upon him. The impact forced him on one knee, but Sieghart was able to regain his footing. With a flick of his wrist, his sword WHP snapped itself back, and the blonde slashed at the towering monster while dodging its hammer. His blade cut deep, but it seemed to barely affect the monster as it raised its weapon for another swing. A thunderous blow rocked the area, but it did not come from the impact of Hellwalker hammer against Sieghart's shield, but from Issei's metal gauntlet meeting the monster square in the jaw as he leaped into the air and punched it. The force of the hit cracked its skull and blew its jaw clean off, but the Hellwalker showed no sign of pain, even its body twisting unnaturally to the side. With a screech, it snapped itself back into position and hurled its massive hammer at Issei. Boost! A surge of blue, dragon fire erupted from his hand, consuming the Hellwalker entirely as it surged upward, melting through its armor and frozen flesh. The intense heat caused the snow around them to instantly evaporate, sending up a cloud of steam that clouded the area. The surrounding trees groaned and cracked as their leaves were set on fire, while the bark around the trunks were scorched and charred. The blast of flame almost knocked Sieghart on his back, but he stood his ground and smirked as he looked at Issei, who slowly raised with what remained of the hammer-wielding Hellwalkers falling and crumpling at his feet. "Can I trust you to watch my back then, Issei Hayadu? Shouldn't I be the one asking that question?" Issei asked, standing back to back with Sieghart as more Hellwalkers surrounded them, making the blonde smirk in response, his grip tightening on his shield and sword before the two of them set off. Blue flames erupted around Issei, enveloping his body as he dashed forward, the heat melting away the snow beneath his feet that would have otherwise slowed him down. His sacred gear glowed with a searing intensity as he pummeled into the first group of Hellwalker, the powerful blows of sheer brute force and blue fire shattering and vaporizing the monsters before their armors collapsed into a smoking heap of ice and ash. Sieghart was right behind him, his sword WHP a blur as he swung the weapon in a wide arc, making the blade unfurl and slash through two Hellwalkers sneaking up on Issei with one smooth strike. An armored Hellwalker was able to intercept his weapon with its mace, but Issei didn't waste any time to take care of it, sending the monsters flying into a nearby tree with another punch. The impact was so powerful that the tree splintered, the sound of cracking wood echoing through the battlefield. What a peeling flame, Issei. Truly a worthy warrior to fight by my side. Thank you. Issei replied, unsure to how he should react as Sieghart spoke while extending a hand at him, as if waiting for him to take it. Just before Issei could even understand what he was really trying to do, the blonde pulled back and twirled around to punch the back of his shield. The impact sent a shockwave that tore through the charging group of Hellwalkers, knocking them off their feet and scattering them like pins in a bowling alley. Issei took the opportunity to dart forward, his blue flames blazing around him as he tore through the fallen monsters, blasting them away with explosive force. At the same time, Sieghart swung his sword WHP, cleaving through the air and dispatching any remaining foes in his path. Partner, watch your mana. Got it, Drake. Issei replied, turning his attention to the side just as the Hellwalkers in that direction launched their ice spears at him. Worry not, my appealing dragon friend. Before Issei could dodge, Sieghart descended before him from above and used his shield to block the spears, letting Issei use his back as a springboard to boost himself into the air, launching a quick dragon shot at the group of Hellwalkers, blasting them off even as they created ice walls before them to shield themselves from the attack. Let's end this here. Come on out, boys. Issei said as he landed in front of Sieghart, who turned his gaze down and watched in awe as his shadow troopers, wolves and panthers started emerging from his shadow, leaving those who hadn't seen them gasping as they looked on in awe and bewilderment. Before long, his shadow soldiers, with the exceptions of Lycaon and those that Issei had left behind to protect his friends in Kuo, took their positions behind him, their weapons ready as they gazed at the monsters before them. Don't make me look bad in front of these heroes. Go. The Hellwalkers were unprepared for the onslaught. Before they could even react, the shadow soldiers tore into them, their claws, fangs and weapons rending through frozen flesh like butter. Their enemies fought back just as fiercely, but any damage the Hellwalkers managed to inflict on the shadows was swiftly healed, allowing them to continue their onslaught with brutal efficiency. Level up. That's way more experience than I expected. Is it because they are Red Gates monsters? Issei pondered as he stood back and watched the battle with Sieghart, paying close attention to his mana reserves to make sure that he wouldn't completely deplete himself by automatically healing his troops. A sudden, deep screech tore through the air before another Hellwalker emerged from the wood. This one was massive, towering over every other as its cold, glowing blue eyes seemed to burn with fury, contradicting its frozen flesh. In its hands were two massive battle axes, their jagged, icy edges gleaming menacingly as it entered the battle in thick, spiked armor. As it stepped onto the battlefield, the ground beneath its feet seemed to freeze, sending ripples of frost spreading outward with every movement as it hacked and slashed through the shadow troops. I don't suppose that's the boss of this gate? Issei asked Sieghart, even though he could answer that inquiry himself thanks to the system. Before him was only an elite monster that was a couple levels higher than the other Hellwalkers. No. This one is only the strongest of these Hellwalkers. They're quite common in gates like this. Sieghart answered, ready his weapon. Before he could join the battle since the shadows were clearly no match for the new enemy, Issei held his hand out and stopped him. Gladio. On his command, the shadow who had been standing idly at his side removed his sword from the ground and walked forward, his presence dwarfing that of the elite Hellwalker itself. The two stood facing each other for a split second, before the monster let out an animalistic screech before raising its battle axes high. With a vicious roar, it swung the weapons down toward Gladio, aiming to cleave him in half. But the shadow was much, much faster. His blade was nothing but a blur as he parried both axes with effortless precision. In the same fluid motion, he swung his giant weapon in a wide arc, decapitating the Hellwalker before it could even react, generating a powerful gust of wind that blew up the snow around them. The monster let out a final, silent scream, its body trembling before it collapsed, headless, to the ground, with Gladio swiftly snatching its head from the air as he turned around and made his way back. Issei to get down on one knee before him, blade at his side as he presented his MSTR with the head of his enemy with a stoic, yet respectful posture. Wow! I thought when they died and became my shadows they would get weaker to start scaling up with me, but it seems it's not the case for Gladio. Issei thought in amazement as he looked at his, probably, strongest shadow. Since acquiring Gladio, Issei hadn't had a real battle where he actually needed to use his strength, so this was his first time witnessing the shadow in action. The level difference between Gladio and the other shadow troopers was immense, and it showed in the way he handled the elite Hellwalker like it was little more than a nuisance. Well, that was appealing. Before Issei could probably praise Gladio, Sieghart exclaimed, his voice booming over the battlefield as the last of the Hellwalkers was swiftly dispatched by Issei's shadows and the other heroes. Soon enough, the raid found themselves taking refuge inside a cave that had been marked on their map by the scouts. The jagged, dark entrance provided a safe shelter from the brutal snowstorm that had been wreaking havoc outside. Inside, the temperature was far more tolerable as the chill of the storm was replaced by the comforting warmth of several campfires that Issei helped set up with the mages. The howling wind became a distant noise as the soft crackles of fire and the low murmurs of conversations filled the space. "How's the wounded, Sieghart-san?" Issei asked, glancing over his shoulder to look at Sieghart when he noticed the man approaching him he guarded at the entrance with his shadow troopers, having volunteered to take the first shift since everyone else who could effectively fight was exhausted after the battle against the Hellwalkers. "Our healers are tending to them. They'll be fine," Sieghart replied, his usual flamboyant tone softened as he came to stand beside Issei, who resumed his watch over the swirling storm outside the cave. "You fought well out there, kiddo. Why they left you a supporter is beyond me, but if you hadn't been with us, we'd have left that battlefield with far worse than a few scratches and bruises." "Glad I could help, Sieghart-san," Issei answered with a smile, making Sieghart reach out and pat him on the shoulder. "So, what now? We can't stay here forever, can we?" "No. This cave should do it for us in this storm, but we can't stay here. This area is far too open." Sieghart shook his head and answered, making Issei nod his head in understanding, "We need to find another location, somewhere we can take shelter for an extended time and keep everyone safe until we find the boss and beat it. Waiting for the dungeon break as our only way out isn't an option. This gate's only been open for a day in our world, but since 1 hour outside is equal to a full day here, we could be looking at several weeks, or even months, if we don't kill the boss soon. So, we really are trapped here." Issei sighed, glancing back at the exhausted raid members. Some were sleeping, others sat in their spots and stared grimly at their weapons, but most were huddling around the fire, finding comfort in the flame and one another. "Cheer up, kiddo. I know that this is a lot for you to take in, but you have this appealing man here to lead you. Everything will be fine." Sieghart grinned, resting his hand once again on Issei's shoulder, making the young man chuckle back in response. In his mind, he could tell that Drake just rolled his eyes. It was clear that Sieghart's flamboyant attitude had started to get on his nerves. But he didn't mind it that much. "By the way," Issei began, remembering something that he had noticed in the battle earlier, "can I talk to you about something? Is it how to look as spectacular as I am?" No. Issei chuckled forcefully, making Sieghart drop his shoulders as if he actually believed that Issei was about to discuss that topic with him. "It's about those Hellwalkers back then." "What about them?" do you know how my power works? Issei asked, his hand reaching out to slide the fur on the head of the wolf who had laid down at his feet. Sieghart could tell he wasn't referring to his sacred gear's main ability. Well, I read your files. You are pretty much a necromancer, right? The blonde asked, making Issei nod his head in response. Yeah, so basically, I can extract the shadows of slain foes and bring them back as my soldiers. The stronger they were in life, the harder it is for me to revive them, Issei said, finding the right words to explain it to Sieghart without revealing anything he shouldn't. So basically, I couldn't revive those hellwalkers. Like, it's not because they were too strong. It's more like there wasn't anything there for me to bring back. Okay, I must admit, that sounds a bit creepy. Sieghart admitted honestly with a gesture of his finger. After a second, the look on his face became serious. So, you are saying that those hellwalkers. This is just my gut's feeling, but I think those enemies are just minions created or summoned by someone to attack us, or maybe to gauge our overall strength. Their attack patterns might make it look like they are mindless monsters, but they went for our weakest members, the supporters, right from the get-go. They wanted to thin us out right from the start to overwhelm the fighters with their number. Issei said, making Sieghart furrow his brows as he crossed his arms over his chest. If you ask me, it's like someone was controlling them, constructing them from our images, just, dead. Sieghart nodded his head. Indeed, the name, Hellwalkers, had been given to those monsters due to their resemblances to the undead monsters born from the wandering souls of those who were condemned to Helheim of the Norse pantheon, not because they were actually those reanimated corpses. There were plenty of gate monsters that looked like humans, but when Issei put it that way, Sieghart had to ask himself why he had ever considered them in that manner before. It was a truly unsettling thought, one that Sieghart hoped would stay as it was, speculation. Despite neither sensing any suspicious presence, Issei and the black-haired young man, whose face had become familiar to him despite the noticeable changes over the months, both shot their hands out at the same time to stop the arrow flying toward the young girl standing between them. As Issei expected, the arrow passed harmlessly through his hand, but the other young man managed to catch it, stopping it mere inches from the girl's head. An armored warrior standing a few feet away from them, however, was not so fortunate. No one near him saw the arrow coming in time, and they reacted even slower to the attack. The projectile pierced the man squarely between the eyes, encasing half of his head in ice before his body even hit the snow beneath him. Issei snapped his head to the side, his eyes locking onto tall, humanoid figures emerging from the shadows cast by the towering trees. Though they bore a striking resemblance to humans, their blue skin, white hair, glowing white eyes, and long elven ears set them apart. Each one held a bow, their piercing gazes fixed on the group, clearly targeting the weakest members to thin their numbers. Noticing the young man next to him crush the arrow in his hand, Issei turned his attention over and saw him glaring at one of the elves. One of them sneered, raising his free hand to draw a smug, deliberate neck-cutting motion across his throat with his thumb before vanishing into the winds with his partner, moving with a speed and silence that made them impossible to follow. The party was left standing in tense silence, the wind howling around them, as an uneasy feeling settled over the group. Issei watched, in shock and confusion, as the giant man who looked like the party leader picked out the strongest members of the group and left with them, leaving the young man and the noticeably weaker ones behind to fend for themselves. It did not take it long, however, for the young man to prove himself more than capable of handling the situation. He provided warm clothing to those left with him, shielding them from the cold and the dangers lurking in the snowy forest. When a massive ice bear charged at the group, the young man leaped into the air and descended upon the monster to defeat it with a single, powerful punch. The devastating impact of the punch sent its colossal body crashing into the snow, lifeless, with a deep fist-shaped indent caved into its skull as the young man sat on its back, looking quite satisfied as he had found more than enough food to supply them for days to come. "You are doing well." Issei gasped, his eyes widening in surprise when he heard that voice, looking over to see the young man looking directly at him. He opened his mouth to speak, to address him, to ask what was going on, but no sound came out, no matter how hard he tried. The other young man, meanwhile, remained as calm as he had always been. With the bangs of his dark hair shadowing one of his eyes, he continued to speak to Issei, all the while rubbing his wrist. Your situation is a little better than mine. Unlike what happened to us, your group sticks together, and you have a capable leader leading them with you, while our leader made the decision to abandon those that he deemed weak. But you are in much greater danger than we ever were, so be very careful from now on, Issei. The survivability of everyone in your group depends on it. And with that, Issei felt himself JRK awake, his eyes blinking open as his internal clock roused him from his slumber. His mind lingered on the dream for a moment as he continued to lie there, staring blankly up at the wooden ceiling above him. Lately, he had begun to wonder, were all these dreams truly just dreams, or was there something more to them? They were too vivid, too real, to be mere figments of his imagination. And then there was the young man, the same figure who appeared in every dream, now speaking directly to him. Issei hated to admit it, but it had started to become a little creepy. Shaking the thoughts off, Issei sat up, tossing off the thick fur that he used as his blanket. It belonged to the beast he had slain days ago in the area not far from where they were staying, and though he had initially tried to decline it, believing others needed it more than he did, everyone had insisted he keep it for himself. Admittedly, the fur had become a rare luxury that had kept him warm during the long, bitterly cold nights in this seemingly endless, snow-covered forest. From the look of it, the storm had ceased for the day, but the biting cold still remained, as relentless as ever. Morning, partner. Morning, Drake. Turning around, Issei set his bare feet onto the cold wooden floor of his cabin and stood up, moving over to his clothing rack to grab his fur jacket before heading outside for his daily morning workout. Despite the harsh conditions, he had a strict routine to stick to, more out of necessity than choice, as the system continued to issue its daily quest to make him work out at 4 every morning, refusing to let him break his schedule for even a single day. Issei still had no idea what the punishment would be for failing to complete the quest on time, but he had no intention of finding out, not when there were people depending on him for their survivability every day. Morning, Issei-kun. Morning. Hayato-san. Issei smiled, his breath forming faint puffs of mist in the cold morning air as he offered a wave of his hand to the man currently patrolling the area before picking up the pace to a jog. As he moved through his daily tasks, his thoughts drifted to their current situation, while wondering how Rias and everyone were doing. They must have heard the news by now, as 2 weeks, 14 hours in their world, had passed since they had been trapped in this red gate. Even though the conditions were harsh, things had settled down and their group had managed to hold its own. It felt like it was just that yesterday that they had managed to find this clearing where they had built their base, which they had called simply as the Hideaway, a home amidst the harsh, snowy landscape and the relentless monsters lurking in the snow. The cliff behind them provided cover from storms, while the huge lake in the front offered a source of fresh water. It was far from ideal, but it was far better than wandering aimlessly in the cold or staying in caves when night fell. While everyone contributed to the construction of the hideaway, it was his shadow soldiers that had made the process significantly faster. Unlike them, his shadows didn't tire or suffer from the cold, and in just 2 days, they had built a sturdy wall with spike traps around the area to protect them from monsters before constructing several wooden cabins to house the raid. Each cabin, while modest, provided much-needed shelter from the harsh weather, and the wall offered a sense of security that was sorely lacking when they first arrived. Anything to report? Issei asked, pausing briefly at a lookout near the main gate where 2 of his shadows stood on duty. They bowed in response before shaking their heads, silently conveying that all was clear. With that, Issei resumed his run, pushing forward with steady strides. Having just completed the first lap around the hideaway, he still had several more to go to cover the required distance. Thankfully, the quest had never specified where he had to run, so he never had to leave the base for his morning routine. And once their home had been built, it became a matter of ensuring their survival. Once their home had been built, it became a matter of ensuring their survival. Fortunately, the lake they had been drawing water from also provided a steady supply of fish. Breaking through the thick ice was no small task, but the full stomachs made the effort worthwhile. Combined with the animals and beast-type monsters they were able to hunt in the surrounding forest, they managed to maintain a steady supply of food. In this regard, the harsh cold worked to their advantage. The freezing temperatures acted as a natural preservation method, allowing them to store meat without fear of spoilage for days, sometimes even weeks. This gave them more time to focus on other essential tasks without the constant need to hunt, though they always remained mindful to keep their stores well stocked. Every day, a scouting party would leave their base to search the forest for game and monsters, as their main goal was to find the boss and kill it to end the Red Gate. At the same time, most supporters stayed at the base, taking care of cooking, mending clothes, maintaining tools and weapons to keep them in top condition, and reinforcing the defenses and traps around the wall. Firewood gathering also became an everyday task, as the cabins required a near-constant supply to keep them warm throughout the bitterly cold nights. Issei helped out wherever he could, but mostly with the fighting while his shadows took care of the rest. After Sieghart, who had been keeping the hideaway running like a well-oiled machine, decided that his unique skill set and combat capability would be wasted as a supporter, he had become a member of the main strike team, allowing Issei to fight alongside the heroes that he had started to admire for their courage and resilience. Still, despite the fact that Issei had proven himself to be their strongest fighter, he suspected that at least half the population of the hideaways believed sending him out to fight was a risky move by their leader, and Issei could see why. Devil or dragon, he was only 17, technically a kid in the eyes of the adults, so naturally they believed that they should be the ones doing all the fighting for him instead of the other way around. Many had also grown fond of him, even more so than their eccentric leader, but most importantly, Issei and his shadows had proven themselves to be an invaluable asset to the hideaway, making their daily survival, against the constant snowstorms and the dangers lurking in the snowy landscape, much easier than it should have been. If anything were to happen to him, his shadows would also disappear, and the hideaway would be left without that extra edge. As much as he appreciated their concern, staying behind and being looked after was the last thing he wanted. Some had voiced their opinions on the matter, but Issei had made it clear that he would continue fighting, using everything at his disposal until the Red Gate was nothing more than a bad memory. "Hey, Issei. Sieghart is looking for you. Go see him in the main house when you can." "Okay. Can you let him know I will be there in a bit?" Issei replied, glancing at the man standing on the ground below while hanging upside down from the tree branch he had been using for his sit-up task. Sit-ups, 120 out of 120. Quest completed. The path toward True Might 3. The notification window popped up, making Issei grin before allocating the new level into his Shadow Monarch subclass. After 2 weeks inside the Red Gate, his overall level was now level 40 Dragonsworn / level 15 Shadow Monarch. His attributes likewise had increased by a decent amount. Leveling had been progressing smoothly for him, thanks to the monsters of the Red Gate yielding an abundance of experience points. Even his daily quest had become more challenging, offering greater rewards upon completion. He could push for the secret limits again, but since Sieghart was looking for him, it's best not to keep him and the captains, who formed a small council running the hideaway, waiting as they were probably discussing their next moves. The sun had risen, and another day beyond the Red Gate began. The warmth of the hearth hit Issei as he stepped into the main house, brushing frost off his sleeves before turning his attention to the large wooden table in the center of the room, where Sieghart, Frank, who represented the supporters as their leader, and the captains appeared to be discussing the locations for their next scouting mission. The table before them was strewn with maps and sketches, marked with notes indicating danger zones and unexplored regions, many of which they could not tread too far into because of the storms. But since they seemed to have good weather that day, no doubt the captains wanted to go in there and explore the areas. "What about this route here?" Satu, the leader of the 1st Division, suggested, his finger tapping an area on the map just north of their camp. If the weather holds, we might be able to push deeper into this side of the forest before nightfall. Captain Hayes of the 2nd Division shook his head, eyes narrowing as he studied the map. Too risky. That place is crawling with predators. For all we know, we could be walking right into their dens. I think the eastern ridge is a much safer option. But that could take us days to cross. By the time we are halfway through, another storm could strike. Satu reasoned with his arms crossing over his chest, making Sieghart and Frank, who represented the supporters as their leader, exchange a look. It was then that Sieghart finally noticed Issei, who had been awkwardly standing in the same spot since entering the room, and welcomed him with his usual flair. "Ah, there you are, my appealing dragon friend." Issei chuckled at the usual dramatic greeting. "Morning, Sieghart-san. Heard you were looking for me." "Indeed, indeed." Sieghart gestured grandly toward the table, his shining armor, which he polished every day, catching the firelight. "Come join us. We are just discussing our next little excursion into the icy unknown today." "Morning, Issei." "Morning, Frank." "Everyone." Issei greeted, lowering his head politely to the others as they smiled at him in acknowledgement before walking up to stand next to Sieghart and Frank. While he might not be part of the council, not officially, at least, Sieghart let him join so that he would know what decisions were being made and could lend his strength where he needed. After Issei had settled in, the captains resumed their debate, their voices overlapping as they argued. Satu pointed to the northern area on the map. "I'm telling you, Hayes, this route offers the most potential. If the weather holds for just a single day, we can push further than we have ever been in days." "And risk walking straight into a predator ambush?" Hayes shook his head. "The eastern ridge is a safer option. It may take longer, but we will get results without unnecessary casualties. We're not accomplishing anything by sitting on our hands." Satu shot back, his voice rising. "If we keep taking the safer routes, we'll be here until spring thaws." Frank cleared his throat, trying to maintain the peace between the two captains. "Maybe there's a way to mitigate the risks for both." The room grew tense as the captains started talking over one another again, each defending their opinion on the matter while Frank acted as the mediator and tried to keep the argument from escalating. Issei could only stand there and glance between them, not feeling entirely sure if he should give his opinion or not since this was a serious matter. Fortunately, enough for him, he did not have to, as Sieghart raised his hands dramatically, calling for order. "Your passion is commendable, my friends, but let us not forget that indecision is the greatest enemy of all," Sieghart declared dramatically, causing all eyes to turn to him. With a smile, he then turned his gaze down and placed a finger on the map. "Neither option is perfect. What we need is a plan that minimizes risks while still making progress. We know not for how long this appealing weather will stay, but we need to use every second of it. I decree that we send a scouting party to the northern area. A small, capable team is enough. They will help us assess the danger before the rest of us proceed. How does that sound?" "I will take the lead." Satu volunteered eagerly. Hayes fixed his gaze on their leader, giving him a skeptical look. "Are you sure about this, Sieghart? Sending a small group into that kind of threat could backfire." Slowly, Issei raised his hand, making all eyes turn to him. It was Satu who spoke up before the young reincarnated devil could say anything. "No. You will stay here, Issei. We have talked about this. These scouting missions are far too risky for you to come along." Issei gave a small, apologetic smile. I didn't mean to ask to join the mission, Satu-san. I just wanted to tell you if you need extra support, I could have another squad of shadow soldiers tag along with you guys." Since they were essentially immortal and could not die, Issei had attempted to send his shadow soldiers out to scout before, but the results had been far from what he had hoped for. Without direct instructions from him, his minions were often no match for the more ferocious monsters lurking in the forest in small groups. They would charge ahead, only to be torn apart by beasts far stronger than they were, causing him to more often than not waste his entire mana reserve just for them to reform and return to him, as they kept getting killed on the way back. That, and the fact that none of them could not talk, made it so much harder for them to know what were in the area that they ventured into. If only he could communicate with them, or see through their eyes. At the very least, the shadow wolves and panthers were quite useful. Both types were quick on their feet and agile, capable of navigating even the most treacherous terrains with their riders. Because of this alone, they had become a valuable asset for the scouting missions, helping the teams traverse the rough, frozen landscape far more efficiently than they could on foot. Right. With luck, we should be able to make it back before nightfall, Sada said with a nod toward Issei. Well, that settles it, then. Sieghart nodded his head with a smile. Before he could continue, Hayes cleared his throat, stepping forward. Hold on, Satu. If you think I'm just going to let you do this by yourself, you are dead wrong. I'm coming along. Sada turned to him with a raised eyebrow, his lips twitching into a grin. You sure about that, old man? Old man? Hayes scoffed, folding his arms. I'll show you old. Someone gotta keep you from rushing headlong into trouble. Might as well be me. Fine, fine, Sada chuckled, shaking his head. Meet me at the gate in 10 minutes. Don't forget your walking stick, Hayes. As the captains left to gear up for the mission with Frank, Sieghart turned his attention back to Issei and asked. Well, my dragon friend, now that the matter has settled, wanna go fishing with me? Today is a rare, appealing day, and we could use a break before the next storm rolls in. What do you say after breakfast? Fishing? With you? Issei asked in surprise, raising an eyebrow. Not that he had anything else to do besides training all day with some of the more seasoned heroes of their group, as some of them had been helping him hone his techniques, but Sieghart was simply too good as a fisherman for him to join him. After all, it was Sieghart who had caught the first few fish for the group during the first few days of the hideaway, using nothing but a makeshift fishing rod crafted from a sturdy branch, some twine, and a sharpened piece of metal. Have you ever gone fishing before? If not, then there's no need to worry, my dear friend. I'll teach you how to fish, as well as how to look as spectacular as I do while doing it. No better time to learn than on a day like this. What do you say? Issei chuckled as Sieghart struck a flamboyant pose in front of the window, his armor glinting brightly in the rare morning sunlight. Well, I think I will give it a try. Splendid, my friend. Now come, let us see what delightful delicacy the kitchen has prepared for us today. You know, now I just have a feeling that you want me to tag along because you need me to melt a hole through this ice. Oh, your words hurt me so, Issei. How could you think of your appealing older brother so little after all we have been through these past 2 weeks? Sieghart replied with mock offense, putting a hand over his chest dramatically. Having gotten used to the theatrical nature of the blonde-haired hero, Issei just grinned in response before following Sieghart to the lake outside of their hideaway. Moving to the edge, Issei took off one of his gloves and lowered himself down on one knee to place his right hand on the cold, frozen surface, unleashing a continuous, steady torrent of blue dragon flame from the palm of his hand, letting it spread outward across the area in front of him. Within just a few seconds, a large section of the ice had dissolved despite its thickness, revealing the water below with steam rising from the surface as Issei rose to his feet. A job well done as usual. Sieghart beamed as he patted Issei on his shoulder before handing him back his fishing rod. Now, allow me to teach you the art of appealing fishing. First is how to cast your line. Soon enough, with their fishing lines settled in the water, Issei and Sieghart sat back in the chairs that they had brought along with them. Between them, a small kettle rested over the fire Issei had made using a few branches they had collected from the nearby tree, simmering quietly as a soothing scent of herbs filled the air around the two as they enjoyed the rare morning sunlight. Here. Sieghart said as he poured the boiling liquid into 2 cups, offering one to Issei, who accepted it with both hands and blew lightly on it before taking a cautious sip. The flavor was bitter, causing Issei to cough while Sieghart just grinned in amusement. Not hot chocolate, is it? Yeah, you tell me. Issei chuckled as he looked at the liquid in his cup. Still, the warmth from the drink spread through his body quickly, easing the chill in his bones. He took another sip, this time more confidently, and leaned back into his seat while holding the cup in his gloved hand, letting his mind wander for a moment. He thought about the scouting party and wondered if Satu, Hayes, and the others had made it to the destination, having seen them off earlier with Sieghart at the gate before heading off to eat breakfast. Since they wanted to keep the party small so they could move quickly, the shadow squad he had sent with them consisted of only 5 shadow troopers and 1 berserker, trusting that they would be enough to help the heroes handle whatever came their way. You know, this is kinda chill, no pun intended. Sieghart said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Going fishing with you like this, it reminds me of the fishing trips I used to go with my brothers. Brothers? Issei asked, raising an eyebrow as he turned to look at Sieghart. Yup. I'm the youngest in the family. I have always wanted a younger brother though. Sieghart replied with a chuckle, puffing out his chest proudly. What about you, Issei? Any brother or sister? Issei shook his head as he stared down into the cup in his hands. His mother did have 2 miscarriages before she had him, but Issei had never dwelled too much on the idea that he could have had 2 older siblings. I'm an only child. It was just me, my parents. But I do have a little sister now, sorta. Asia moved into our home to live with us a few weeks ago, and there is also Ria-senpai. Issei continued with a small smile. Rias Gremory. Your MSTR. She lives with you? Sieghart asked, making Issei nod his head in confirmation. Right, I always forget that you are a devil servant of the Gremory, not like Frank and his team, who just work for them. If you don't mind me asking, how did you end up becoming a devil anyway? Ah, well, it's a bit of a long story. Issei began, recalling the event that had led him to become the reincarnated devil servant of Rias Gremory. There was this girl I liked at school, Amano Yuma, or at least, I thought that's who she was. Turned out she was a fallen angel assigned to watch over me because her boss believed I possessed a powerful sacred gear. She was right, and she asked me out and killed me on our date. Wow. You serious? Sieghart gasped, his jaw hanging slightly as Issei nodded his head with a chuckle. And here I thought I had bad luck with women. At least my dates usually just dump me, they don't literally dump me 6 feet under. Issei chuckled sheepishly while scratching the back of his head. Yeah, that was definitely not my proudest moment. I was all excited, thinking I finally scored a date. I didn't have that much luck with girls either. Yuma was really cute too. So, what happened after? Rias Gremory found you and brought you back as her servant? I think I accidentally summoned her with my dying wish. Issei answered, deciding to keep the part that his dying wish was to die in the arms of an appealing woman to himself. Next thing I know, I woke up in my bed like nothing happened. And your life as a devil started that day, I bet. Sieghart nodded knowingly, leaning back in his chair. And here you are, getting trapped in this red gate with us. Guess it's been an eventful and exciting few months for you, hasn't it? You have no idea. Issei chuckled. What about you, Sieghart-san? How did you become a hero? Ah, a tale as grand as mine. Where do I even begin? Sieghart asked, his hands gesturing dramatically toward the sky. Born under a shining star, gifted with unparalleled talent and striking good looks, naturally, the gods themselves demanded I step up to save the world. I mean, how could they not? A man of my caliber. Clearly, it's destiny. Suyuyi. How dare you doubt me? Do you not see the aura of destiny radiating off me? The sheer gravitas of a man chosen by the gods themselves? Sieghart replied, moving his hand sideways as he sat up. With how clean his armor was, it glistened in the sunlight, making him look almost regal, almost glowing as he struck a dramatic pose, his chest puffed out and his chin raised high. After a moment, the blonde dropped the theatrics. His tone softened as he continued with his hands lowering at his side. That, and being heroes is just, a family tradition. My father, my grandfather. They were all warriors, nobles who dedicated their entire life to beauty, grace and fighting to protect the weak. After my brothers chose to follow their footsteps, I decided to do the same. The golden ages of heroes have long since passed, but there are still people that need our help all around the world. Do you know why I chose a shield to be my weapon? So, you could protect your appearance? Issei asked with a raised eyebrow. Notably, he had also noticed that Sieghart had a small mirror attached to the back of his black shield. Strategically, it provided him with the means to check for enemies trying to sneak up on him from behind, a known weakness of tanks and shielders, but Issei was pretty sure Sieghart used it to check himself out more than anything else, even in the midst of battles. The grin that Sieghart had on his face widened, as he was clearly not offended by the remark. Well, you are not wrong there, my dragon friend. A man gotta maintain his image, not just for himself, but for those who fight alongside him. Plus, I have already told you, my family valued beauty and grace above all else. A shield is a perfect weapon to help me maintain my dashing look, even in the middle of a battle. He paused, before continuing with a small, genuine smile that, and protecting others, shielding them from any harm coming their way, there's just nothing in this world that is more appealing than that. For the first time since they met, Issei was speechless. It was as if the man behind the, quite literally, shining armor, dramatic speeches had pulled back a curtain of narcissism to reveal his true self. Moreover, from the moment that they built the hideaway together, Issei had suspected that his comically theatrical demeanors were merely a facade he maintained to amuse those around him. True, it might annoy some and make him seem self-absorbed, egotistic even, but it helped keep their spirits up in the otherwise grim situation that they had found themselves in, giving them the strength to fight for their survival every day. OSHT, you've got a bite, look. Sieghart suddenly said, causing Issei to snap his gaze to his fishing rod to see it bending as something tugged HRD on the line. Whoa, what do I do now? Issei asked as he quickly grabbed his fishing rod and stood up to gain some solid footing before the fish could pull the whole thing away, causing the line to jerk violently in response. Careful now. The line will break if you rush it while it's struggling. Sieghart instructed. Let the fish tire itself out and then reel it in slowly. You have to be patient. Really not my strong suit, Sieghart-san. Issei grinned as he adjusted his grip on the fishing rod, briefly wondering if the line was strong enough for him to just yank the fish out of the water with his strength. However, he quickly dismissed the idea, the rod itself probably was not durable enough for that. It was probably best to follow Sieghart's instructions. Alert! An emergency quest has arrived. Before Issei could do anything else, a notification window suddenly popped up in front of his face, bearing the familiar glowing texts he had seen many times in the past. At the same time, he could see his mana dropping rapidly on the window showing his current status, twisting his stomach with an uneasy feeling as he knew exactly what it meant. Torah! Issei! Sieghart shouted after him in surprise, but Issei had already disappeared into the forest with his shadow Coral, who swiftly leaped out of his shadow at his call and let Issei jump onto its back as he bounded forward, his powerful legs propelling them through the snowy forest with a speed that left the trees blurring past in a gray and white streak. Without wasting any more time, Issei willed open his quest log, and as the familiar blue window appeared before him, what he saw made him widen his eyes in horror and his stomach drop. Emergency quest. Rescue mission. The scouting party is being attacked by a fearsome beast. Many are in critical conditions. Save as many of them as possible. The rewards given will depend on the number of people rescued. Current number of survivors, 7. Faster, Tora. Issei shouted to his coral, which let out a roar in response before digging its claws into the snow and picking up speed, his sleek, shadowy form tearing effortlessly through the snowy landscape. Issei gripped the reins tightly, heart pounding in his chest as he opened the map, his eyes scanning the glowing coordinates. The needle pointed steadily ahead, confirming he was heading toward the right direction. Soon enough, Issei arrived at his destination, a large, open field where numerous scouts lay scattered across the snow amidst the fallen trees, as if something huge had torn its way through the area, leaving huge footprints on the snow-covered ground. 2 were unmoving, unconscious and barely breathing, while the other 3 struggled weakly to stay awake, bodies trembling in pain in the cold air. Each and every one of them was bleeding badly, their blood staining the white snow beneath them in an unsettling contrast. Issei didn't need his observed skill to know that they were all in critical health. Without wasting any time, Issei opened his inventory to bring out several vials of healing potions and handed them to his shadows, who immediately went to the injured scouts on his command, leaving Issei to scan the area for other survivors with Tora. Soon enough, he found Captain Hayes slumping against the trunk of a tree several meters away, his armor battered and his undershirt covered in blood. Grabbing another healing potion from his inventory, Issei quickly rushed to Hayes, using one hand to support his head while the other slowly poured the red liquid into his mouth. As the healing potion took effect, his breathing began to steady, and the color slowly returned to his face, enough for him to regain consciousness. Issei. Hayes murmured weakly as he flustered his eyes open. You're going to be alright, Hayes-san. Issei reassured him before he decided to ask, where is Sada-san? He was, taken by the beast, it came out of nowhere and, attacked us. Your shadows, chased after it. Hayes winced as another wave of pain hit him, his hand clutching his side. Rest, Hayes-san. I will find him. Issei spoke to the man before summoning another shadow trooper to help take care of him, looking back to the rest to give the command, you guys stay here and take care of them. Tora, with me. Once he had settled on the back of Tora, his shadow coral moved swiftly into the forest, following the path of destruction that was left behind by the unknown beast. Fallen trees lay scattered across the ground, some broken in half while others uprooted entirely. Grua! A deafening roar suddenly echoed through the trees, sending the snow-covered ground rumbling. Immediately, Issei spurred his shadow toward the direction while the ground continued to shake beneath them. The roar echoed again, louder this time, and soon enough, Issei arrived at the clearing where his shadows were struggling against a hulking beast, which stood towering over the scattered remains of trees, its thick, blue skin gleaming under the light. Spiked protrusions ran down its back and limbs, while twisted horns curved ominously over its head. Massive, clawed paws swiped at the shadowy figure attacking it, each swing carrying enough force to send shockwaves that blew snow into the air. Its jaws, gaping with long, jagged teeth, were ready to tear into anything within reach, adding to the menace of its terrifying form. Kuza Beast, LV-50. Rank A Hunt. A hunt? This is your first hunt then, partner. We can worry about that later, Drake. Tora, grab Sada-san and get him out of here. Look after him. Noticing the unconscious captain lying beneath the giant form of the massive beast, Issei shouted the command to his shadow coral before putting his feet on its back, using his shadow as a pedestal to launch himself into the air as he dashed forward, narrowly avoiding the giant paw of the Kuza beast as it swiped at him. Swiftly, Tora weaved under its body to reach the unconscious Satu, pulling him out of the way by the back of his shirt just before the giant monster above them could strike again. Pact SWCH. Chaos Karma Dragon, Tiamat, Fire, Y-Drag Gotch, Fire. Activate Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker, Boosted Gear, Crimson Armaments. Skill activated, Penetrate. Boost. At the same time, donning his arms in Balance Breaker Dragon Gauntlets, with Raisin's blade strapping to the back of his left shoulder, Issei descended upon the Kuza beast with a devastating, penetrate empowered punch that was infused with the red flame of his dragon partner. The moment his fist connected with its head, the air around him exploded, sending out a shockwave that rippled through the air. As the very ground beneath the Kuza beast trembled, the giant monster staggered back, stumbling and crashing to the side. Skill activated, penetrate. Boost. Skill activated, Phoenix shift. Issei didn't give it a chance to recover. The moment his feet touched the ground, he engulfed himself in dragon flame and dashed forward, vaporizing the snow in his path before it could slow him down, closing the distance before the Kuza beast could rise. Disappearing in a burst of flame, Issei reappeared next to the monster in a blink of an eye and hammered his fist into its side, the force of the powerful phoenix strike launching the Kuza beast across the clearing, its massive body leaving a deep imprint in the ground. The beast snarled before swiping at Issei. Bringing out his wings, Issei immediately took off to avoid its paw, narrowly dodging the massive claws as they cut through the air below him before following up with the momentum to launch an uppercut into its jaw, causing the Kuza beast to snap its head back, its giant body following briefly before crashing down just as Issei launched himself at the monster with another phoenix strike. Boost. The force of the blow sent the giant beast staggering back, and just before the monster could recover, Issei used his wings to propel himself into the air once more to dish out a series of quick jabs to its head, boosting his power up each time. Each hit connected with a thunderous impact that echoed and could be felt across the landscape, making the Kuza beast roar in pain and fury as Issei continued bombarded it from every direction. Its gigantic tail thrashed angrily against the ground as it furiously swung its paws at him, but Issei swiftly flew under the swinging paw before he could be swatted like a bug and immediately launched himself back up to land a heavy blow into its body, briefly lifting its body off the ground before it came crashing down once more. Enraged, the beast bellowed, sending out a series of shockwaves that forced Issei back, giving it a brief opening to brace itself to swing its tail at him. Before the Kuza beast could do just that, however, a familiar sword WHP wrapped itself around the end of its tail and stopped it, causing the Kuza beast to snap its head over its shoulder. At the same time Issei looked to the side to see Sieghart standing just behind the monster, holding its tail back with his weapon with a wide grin on his face, though it did not last very long as the Kuza beast swung its tail and flung him away like a ragdoll. Boost. Skill activated, transfer. Skill activated, vital slash. Skill activated, penetrate. Activating boosted gear abilities in rapid succession, Issei descended toward the monster just as it turned back to him, his right hand reaching across his shoulder to grab at the hand of his fire sword. Flames erupted from the blade as its stored power surged to its peak, radiating an intense heat that spread across the entire area and vaporized even the falling snow above him, leaving a faint mist in the air. The Kuza beast roared, baring its jagged teeth as it swiped at him with a massive paw, but Issei twisted in the air, narrowly dodging the strike and letting its claws sail past him harmlessly before he spun around, using the momentum to unsheath his sword and bring the fiery blade down its neck in a wide arc, slicing through its flesh and bone like a hot knife cutting through butter. The Kuza beast let out a guttural growl, the sound fading as the blade completed its swing, leaving its massive head to fall forward, thudding heavily onto the ground, followed by the collapse of its enormous as Issei landed gracefully in front of the fallen beast, the flames around his sword flickering before extinguishing as he sheathed it. Hunt complete. You have been rewarded 500.000 G, and a Kuza horn refining material. Level up. You have earned a new title, Wild Bane. Deal 40% more damage to beast-type monsters. Emergency quest completed. Your observe skill has leveled up, LV2. The enhanced skill now allows you to perceive not only the current state of your targets but also see the names of the techniques, skills, and magic targeting you while they are being casted. Does not work on instantaneous abilities. That was appealing. Sieghart exclaimed, just as Issei had expected, his voice booming across the clearing as he rushed back with his arms flailing in exaggerated excitement. Not a single leaf clung to his hair, nor was there a speck of snow on his armor, making him look as if he had emerged from being flung across the entire area completely unscathed. "Thanks for the assist, Sieghart-san," Issei said, nodding his head to the man as he stopped beside him. Sieghart struck a dramatic pose, one hand on his hip and the other sweeping out toward Issei as he said, "Assist? Please, it hardly looked like you needed my help at all. If anything, my arrival merely adds a touch of flair to your grand performance. You took care of the beast like it was nothing." "Yeah, it's not my first time. I have dealt with giant monsters before. They are much easier to fight than you think." Issei chuckled, recalling the events of his class change quest before widening his eyes. "Captain Satu is being taken care of, along with Hayes and the others. I didn't come here alone, you know. They're going to be all right." Sieghart nodded, his hand reaching out to pat Issei reassuringly on the shoulder, allowing him to let out a sigh of relief he didn't know he was holding in. "Since we're still trapped here. This monster is not the boss, is it?" "No." Issei muttered before drifting his gaze to the fallen beast behind them, with the target is eligible for shadow extraction notification hovering next to the decapitated head. "You're going to revive this beast, Issei?" Sieghart asked in interest. Having seen Issei do it before, he knew exactly what was about to happen. Because of their unique nature, Issei couldn't extract the shadows of the ice walkers, but the other monsters and predators they had encountered in this red gate, they were all fair game for him. "Why not, right?" Issei asked with a grin and extended his hand out. "Arise." Tendril of shadow erupted from the decapitated body of the Kuza beast, swirling around its massive form. For a moment, Issei thought it had worked, but then the shadow flickered and dissipated, leaving the beast motionless. Failed to extract the shadow, remaining attempt February 3rd. Issei frowned. "Okay, maybe a little more effort." Stretching his arms and legs a little, as if it could increase his chance to succeed, Issei then stepped closer to the fallen monster and called out, a little louder this time. "Arise." The shadow reappeared again, but once more it failed to solidify. The beast's body remained unmoving. Its massive form remained as lifeless as before. Failed to extract the shadow, remaining attempt 1/3. "Maybe it's just not your day?" Sieghart asked, amusement in his voice. He had seen Issei fail before, so it wasn't a huge surprise when the monster didn't come back to life. "Third time the charm, maybe?" Issei asked, trying to not let his frustration show. Not being able to add a formidable and badass shadow to his ranks always stung. "Last try. Arise." At the verbal command, more shadow erupted from the beast, swirling around Issei, thickening, and for a moment, it seemed like it finally worked. But then, just as before, the shadow sputtered and vanished. F. Language. Sieghart remarked, his voice light and playful as he stood there and watched the massive body of the fallen Kuza beast breaking apart with an annoyed and disappointed Issei, disintegrating slowly into the ground as if it were never meant to stay. In just moments, the once fearsome beast was reduced to nothing but a fading trail of smoke and dust, leaving the clearing eerily quiet, with the only sound the soft whistle of the winds. "Well, you win some, you lose some, am I right?" Sieghart asked, stepping forward to pat Issei comfortingly on the shoulder before the two left the area to head over to the place where Sieghart's team was taking care of the injured scouts. As they approached, seeing the scouts awake, some still groggy but clearly alive and in one piece, the disappointment Issei had felt over his failed extraction started to fade, leaving him with only a sense of relief. One that, unfortunately, did not last very long. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 11. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author YagamiNguyen on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.